Well, he is finally free. Former intelligence analyst for the U.S. government, Jonathan Pollard, has officially been released from his parole by the U.S. Justice Department on Friday. The American Jew was convicted of spying for Israel and served 30 years in prison for providing sensitive U.S. intelligence to the Jewish state. Well, he was released on parole in 2015 and had wanted to immigrate to Israel with his wife, Esther, but was unable to do so under the strict terms. But now that he's finally free from them, he says that he plans to move to Israel as soon as his wife's health allows for it. Well, Esther Pollard is currently undergoing chemotherapy for an aggressive form of cancer. We have renowned criminal defense attorney and Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz joining us, who also used to be Pollard's lawyer. So let's start with Pollard's case. Tell us a bit about who he is, what he was accused of and served time for.
He was accused of providing information to Israel, classified information, which he has admitted doing. But the New York Times and others have exaggerated the importance of the information. They have made up stories about it ending up in the Soviet Union and that he did it for money. It's just not true. He didn't do it for money. He did it out of love for Israel. The Israeli intelligence authorities insisted on giving him small amounts of money, and he certainly didn't do it to help the Soviet Union. These are all myths. And then he was promised that in exchange for pleading guilty and not contesting the charges, which he could have done, he would not get life imprisonment. And because of Caspar Weinberger, a man from a Jewish family who hated Israel, Caspar Weinberger broke the deal, basically, and he ended up getting life imprisonment unfairly. And then it was affirmed by a 2-to-1 vote, with Justice Ginsburg casting the deciding vote against him. The only judge voting for him was a non-Jew. And so a lot of the fault for this lies with American Jews, who were very, very uncomfortable about a Jew spying against their country. And the end result was that justice wasn't done. I tried very hard to get him a parole, a commutation from several presidents, most particularly President Clinton, who came close to doing it. But then George Tenet, the head of the CIA, stepped in and said that he would resign and protest if it happened. So finally, justice is being done. But it should not be celebrated as a political victory in any way. It should be seen as a humanitarian gesture. He should be welcome to Israel, but he shouldn't be made any kind of a hero. The tensions between the United States and Israel were considerable over this issue, and they should be resolved, especially in light of a new administration coming into power. And I think nobody wants to kind of push this in the face of President-elect Biden. So I hope he'll be welcome. He'll be able to lead his life, but let's not turn him into a cause for political gain or political celebration.
Right. Well, it's interesting because you spoke about the American Jewish community having such an issue with Pollard in his case, but Israel has also long stood accused of not really doing enough to secure his release. In fact, when he was captured back in 1985, Israel threw him out of its Washington embassy and into the waiting arms of FBI agents. I mean, why has this case been so huge for both Israel and the United States in their relationship?
Let me be very clear. Israel did exactly the right thing. They could not have kept him in the embassy. It would have caused a terrible, terrible breach between the United States and Israel. It was a terribly hard thing to do, but Israel had no choice. And I can tell you, because I know it personally, that Benjamin Netanyahu did everything in his power to try to get him released, and that Jonathan Pollard and Esther Pollard were wrong when they criticized Prime Minister Netanyahu for not doing enough. He did enough. They've criticized him, but their criticism is misplaced. Everybody tried very hard. Look, Jonathan Pollard doesn't think I did enough. I worked so hard on his behalf. Whenever I saw President Clinton, I would talk to him about it. Finally, President Clinton said to me one day, "Alan, if you come in and talk to me about the Pollard case, I don't want to hear it." And I said, "Mr. President, I'm going to say it. If you don't want to listen, you don't have to listen, but don't tell me what I can say." And I went over the Pollard case again and asked for his release. But Pollard and Esther were never satisfied with anything anybody ever did. Now, I understand that because he was unjustly sentenced to all this time in prison. But you have to understand that Israel and people like me and Erwin Kotler and others and his current lawyers did everything we possibly could to try to get him out. And we are thrilled that he's finally free. He can live in Israel. He can have a humanitarian response in Israel. but don't make it into a political challenge
Right.
to the United States.
Well, why is this decision being made now to allow him to finally immigrate to Israel? Why has it taken so long?
Just routine, just routine. He served his 5 years. It should have happened much earlier, but politics intervened. This time, politics didn't intervene. The rule of law applied. He did his 30 years. He did his 5 years of parole. It would have been, had they not allowed him to emigrate to Israel. They should have allowed him a long time ago, but finally, the rule of law has now prevailed.
Well, given how high profile Pollard's case is there any chance that we could see a reversal of this decision from the Justice Department to allow him to move to Israel once President-elect Biden takes over the White House?
No, I don't think so. But if I were him and I were his lawyers and his family, I would get myself over to Israel before January 20th, just to be absolutely positive and absolutely sure. Now, there are health considerations, but of course, Israel has some of the best health care in the world. So it shouldn't be too difficult for him and his wife to move to Israel. And I would recommend doing it before January 20th. Look, I know Joe Biden. I've known him for years. I can't imagine him reversing this or doing anything to hurt Jonathan Pollard. But you better be cautious than overly aggressive.